If you just take the next step, God has a way of providing exactly what you need. And we're not perfect, but that we're living by the principles that we're trying to teach. And the best businesses we know are built on processes. They have order. They have things that are repeatable. Franchises are able to sell franchises because they have the same process, whether you're in Des Moines, Iowa versus Los Angeles, California.
How do you build a business rooted in faith and service to others and where you leave a legacy of success? Our guest today is an expert in doing just that. He's written a book with 12 principles called Well Done. His name is Ken Gosnell. He's the founder of the CEO Experience. He's been in business.com, Entrepreneur Forbes, where he is loud about the importance of these principles for success. We're going to dive into a number of them today and even hardships that have been experienced where these principles have helped him in tremendous ways. Ken, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Whitney, for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm excited to have you, Ken. And I love your the leadership philosophy, different things that you speak about often. And so let's jump right in there. What shaped some of that? What shaped your leadership? Your philosophy? Was it your upbringing? Maybe your father was an influence on you, or somebody else? What did? Cause I ask people this all the time because I want to influence my children in these ways as well, right? What was that for you?
Yeah, it was a lot of my youth. I grew up in the Midwest, and my father was the oldest of 5 children, and his father, my grandfather, was killed when my dad was 15 years old. And so back in those days, they didn't have life insurance. They didn't have much income. And so my dad quit high school to go to support his family. And so that was the environment that I grew up in. I saw my father take 2 things to work every day as I began to grow. And one was his hard hat, and the other was his Bible. And so I understood hard hat because I understood the importance of hard work, but I didn't understand the Bible. And so one day I asked Dad, "Why do you take your Bible to work every day?" And he said, "Well, son, I read it during my breaks, and it makes me a better man, makes me a better worker." And those 2 things stuck with me, of course, through the years. I'm very grateful to my father and lessons that he taught. But I understood that hard work and even having some wisdom always wasn't necessarily enough to have success. You really had to apply those principles and apply that wisdom. And so that was kind of the journey I was on for many years. As I started to go out, I really wanted to help other people, but I also wanted to change the poverty cycle that I grew up in and that my family had been in for many generations.
Wow, I love the influence your father had there on you, right? I would imagine that it was also very instrumental in like everyone that he worked around, right? Other people saw him reading this and probably asked him, "Hey, what is that?" And then that just gave him the opportunity to share. Was that something that, immediately you took to, or was just like, okay, years later, maybe as you matured or got older, it's like, okay, I really see now why my dad did that, or then I don't know. How did that shape you, or when did you really implement that in your life?
Well, I think that I learned truth and wisdom were practical applications that you could apply even at a young age. And I was fortunate to some degree to get to see some of the consequences of poor decisions in my family or in my upbringing. And my father said something that really helped shape even when I was a young man. He said, a lot of times people talk about these great transformations that they've had in their life, and I experienced a great transformation. He said the best life is somebody that never has to be transformed. They learn kind of the principles or the guideposts along the way, and then they don't make mistakes. And of course, we all make mistakes, and I've made my share of mistakes as well. But I'm very grateful because from a young age, I was able to see that the principles and the lessons that my father had learned in life and in the Bible, they worked. They were proven true and tested. And that's why I like to talk about biblical business principles. I used to teach leaders and organizations, companies all over the the country, could be a larger company or even a smaller company, but I would teach these principles because I knew that they worked. And eventually God called me out to say, hey, why don't you just call them Christian principles or biblical business principles? And so today I can tell people that, hey, these principles that we teach and that will help you grow your business or grow you personally, that they work because they worked 2,000 years ago, they work today, and they'll work 2,000 years from now. And so the more you press into those principles, the more you see and understand the wisdom of those principles.
Incredible. And I want to just go ahead and tell the listeners there'll be a link in the show notes, no doubt. But Ken wrote a book called Well Done, and where he's highlighting these principles in detail. Ken, define the concept of well done, say for that faith-driven business leader. What does that mean?
Well, so one of the passages that my father taught me and that I had kind of embraced as I grew up was the business story in the Bible that's called the parable of the talents. And the story is that this businessman, he had 3 employees and he goes on a journey, it's a business journey. He's going to leave them for a while, and he gives one employee 5 bags of money, and the second employee 2 bags of money, and the third employee 1 bag of money. And he says, hey, use it while I'm gone. Do something with it to produce something while I'm away. And that's a pretty good business. The story ends up going that he comes back, and the guy that had 5 bags of money, he produced 5 more. And the guy that had 2 bags, he produced 2 more. And the guy that had 1 bag, he just went and buried it because he didn't want to lose it. And the story goes on to say that the owner says to the first 2 employees, well done, good and faithful servant. You've pleased me. Enter into my happiness. And, I got more great work for you to do. And the one employee says, hey, you didn't even go invest in the bank. You could have gotten a little bit of interest off of it. You were just kind of lazy. You just went and buried it in the backyard and just ignored my commands or my direction while I was gone. Depart from me, you wicked and lazy servant. You didn't do a very good job. And those 2 words, well done, the more that I thought about that story, I kind of wanted to live my life that way. That whatever I did, whatever project I worked on, whatever leader I worked for, whatever company that I would endeavor to partner with, that I wanted them to look at me and say, hey, he's working to well done. He's doing things that make a difference in this life. And of course, ultimately, we work for an audience of one. We work for our Father who's in heaven. And hopefully one day I'll be able to hear those words from him where he says, well done, good and faithful servant, enter into my master's happiness. So that story and that phrase, well done, is something that really just began to motivate the decisions of my life, the choices that I made. And then what was interesting is I would talk to other Christian business leaders and even non-Christian business leaders, and I would say, hey, we should try to set up this well done framework or this model for your life and for your business. All of a sudden, everybody was saying that resonated with them too. They said, yeah, those words are, what drives me and what motivates me and what's helped me to make the next hard decision or overcome the next big difficulty in my life. And so so that began the journey of, well, what does well done really look like in the life of a leader? And how do we describe that? And what are the principles that should shape the decisions and choices that we make while the leader's away or while the master's away, so that when God looks down at us and the work that we're doing on a daily basis, he can say, well done, good and faithful servant.
I want that mindset as well, right? Like every day that I'm pushing towards that. And I know in your book there's 12 principles. Unfortunately, we can't unpack them all right here, right now. But why don't you pick 1 or 2 that you say, hey, let's start thinking about these things first, right? And let's dive in there a little bit, and maybe how the listener or business owner or really anybody and how they live their life, like how they can start to implement some of these principles. What's maybe the first 1 or 2 that you would think of that you'd want to start with?
Sure, absolutely. I love the principles, and they really have changed a lot of how I lead. I actually started in the business world where I came to that. So what I wanted to do was I actually went back 150 years, and I looked at Christian business leaders, anything that they had written that I could get my hands on, and I wanted to understand how they were leading their business and how they had applied that to their life in a really practical way. So I studied guys like J.C. Penney, who founded the Golden Rule store in the early 1900s and became the largest department store in the country. And it's been in existence now over 100 years. And of course, the Golden Rule store, that was what he named his first store. It eventually got changed to the name of JCPenney. I looked at guys like P.T. Barnum, that in his book, 40 Years of Struggles and Triumphs, that was written back in the 1800s, he talked about his faith in that book and how every day he got up to read the Bible and apply it to his life. And if you begin to think about P.T. Barnum in that perspective, we think about him as the greatest showman and marketing and doing all these things, but really he had a value for people. And part of what he did with his business was he elevated the value of every single person, even if they were unique and different. And so, anyway, in my book, I quote over 200 business books that have been written over the last 150 years. I've had many guys call me up and say, "Hey, Ken, I love your book. Thank you for doing that. You just saved me a lifetime of reading because you referenced so many other books throughout the process." So, but out of those books and out of those studies that I had done, I began to create a list of where I begin to see repeatable principles that these business leaders had practiced over and over and over again in their life. And then I brought it to the Bible, and I wanted to see if everything that they were doing, if it was really rooted and grounded in Scripture. So, long story short, it was over about a 10-year process, and we landed on 12 biblical business principles that have been proven and tested. And they're principles like principle number one: always take the second step. We know in business, a lot of people understand the value of going the second mile. It's a statement that Jesus made. Don't go just 1 mile. Go if the Roman soldier asks you to go two. Two stories that Jesus told, just like the parable of the talent or the parable of the leader that left. I call that principle making the move from owner to overseer. Too many of us think that we own our businesses when in reality God owns all things. We're just called to steward it. So we're to practice steward leadership or to practices that Jesus did. Principle number 10 is improve your team to improve your organization. And Jesus, who had the ability to lead alone, he was the only guy that could have ever done it all by himself. The very first thing that he did in his ministry as he built his organization was he went out and found 12 disciples. He went out and built his team. And so in the book, we talk about those principles and how they apply to today to our businesses and how they can apply not only to one area of your business, but to every area of your business. See, one of the mistakes I think a lot of leaders make is they take that second mile principle and they say, well, that's just good for customer service. But what I found with these successful business owners was they were figuring out how to apply second mile principle or the second step principle to every aspect of their business. So there's always a second step in finances, making sure that your integrity is good, making sure that your audits are clear, making sure that you're handling your money in an effective way and with integrity and honesty. To second mile in how you hire somebody. Do you bring them in for another interview or another level to make sure that they understand the role that they're taking and that you're showing extra interest in who they are and bringing them onto the team. So I found that those principles should and businesses are better when they permeate every aspect of the business, not just the easiest aspect of the business.
I can relate to, I mean, even just principle number one in so many ways, right? Taking the second step. And when you think about how often do other people do that to you or other businesses you're interacting with or, that you're a customer of, when that happens, it stands out in a big way. It's not the common way that businesses are done, unfortunately. So, I mean, that one alone, I feel like it makes you stand out in a big way, and people are going to notice that, and you're going to be able to point back to, like you were talking about, to your, that you're the overseer and really who the owner is, right?
Well, even the second step, the one that I've been focused on, you and I were talking a little bit before about difficulties and hardship. That second step principle for a business leader or anybody that's trying to do something, build a product or build a brand, sometimes overcoming the setback is the second step because there's so many people that are willing to give in and say, I can't do it again, right? Or I've had that difficulty and I'm just hitting my head against the wall. That second step of hey, there's a next step. There's another step to take. I may not be able to see the next 50 steps, right? Or I may not be able to see the next 100 steps, but I can see the next step. And the next step may not be easy. It may be difficult, but That's the step that God's calling me to take. And I can tell you story after story where all of a sudden somebody that had gone through maybe years of defeat or difficulty in business or hardships, that they just kept taking the next step, and they ended up coming through that difficulty. And then all of a sudden, and every great leader, if you read again, every great leader in the Bible and mostly every great leader in business had to overcome a difficulty. They had to take a step. Moses is called, he's faced with the Red Sea, and God says, go take a step. And he says, go into the Red Sea and take that step, and I'll take care of the rest. It wasn't Moses' job to part the Red Sea. It was Moses' job to take the step. I think we've gotten the picture wrong because with that story, is we think Moses stepped in and then God just parted the waters and it was so beautiful and they could clearly see across the way. And I'm not so sure that's the case. I've often thought Moses, he was leading the people, but God kind of divided the water every step he took, right? So that was faithfulness, right? He had to just take the next step. And as he would take that step, God would part the water. But I can see it, right? All the water and the wind and the sand, it's all in his face, and he can't really see much. He can see about a foot in front of him or a step in front of him. And God just says, take the next step and I'll lead you through the path.
I love that visual. So it's not just the first step that took faith, it's every step,
Right.
right, that took faith. Maybe speak to a failure or a loss or maybe a very tough decision you had to make where this principle really, helped you, Ken, in a big way.
Well, I think so. I had another consulting firm before I started CEO Experience, and I was helping business owners and business leaders, and God challenged me to. We had our fourth child. He was. We didn't know at the time, but again, God can see more than I can see, and he ended up having some disabilities and some setbacks. But my wife came to me when she was pregnant, and she said, "Hey, you're gone a lot. You're traveling a lot, and I'd like to see you a little bit more." And that's a beautiful, wonderful thing that for your wife to come tell you that. But that was part of the gig, right? Companies didn't come to me. I went to them, right? So I might travel all over the country. Matter of fact, just talking about difficult decisions at times, she came when I had two kids, and she said to me that I really would like for you not to travel on our kids' birthdays. And I asked her why, because we always celebrated the birthdays on the weekends, right? But I was gone a lot. And she said, I just think it's something about being home with the kids on their actual birthdays. Could you do that? So she was asking for 2 days out of 365 days, right? But it's hard to say no when you have somebody that calls you up and says, hey, Ken, we want you to come into this company and talk to us, and here's the date, and that's the date that we have. And for me to say no, it's my son's birthday or my daughter's birthday. But anyways, I thought about it, and so I thought it was a reasonable request, and she asked me to do it, and so I said I'll do that. And matter of fact, I believed going the second step, so I went back to her and I said, well, I'll miss 4 days. I said I'll not only take the two kids' birthdays off, but I'll take your birthday off, and I'll make sure and take our anniversary off, right? Because I wanted to follow these principles. So anyway, then we had two more children. So anyway, but you know what? So she comes to me when we had our fourth child, and she said, "Hey, I'd like for you to stay home more." So I started thinking about it, and I said, "Well, what would it look like for me to form an organization where I could work with Christian CEOs and business owners, but primarily build retreats or mastermind groups and work with them locally?" And work with them for a longer period of time rather than just go in and give a rah-rah speech or help a business owner get over a hurdle, but really partner with businesses over a period of time so that they could grow their business. And I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time, or outside of Washington. And so I asked a few of my business advisors about it, who are good guys, but I said, hey, I want to work with just Christian CEOs, Christian business owners. And they said, Ken, we're not sure that there's enough Christian business owners in Washington D.C. for you to have a business, And I said, well, I don't know either, but I said, I guess we'll find out, right? And so the principal just taking the next step. It was like, well, let me launch this and start talking about it. And I didn't really know a lot of Christian business owners, quite honestly, because I was traveling a lot, right? I wasn't working just in Washington D.C. So the way my wife and I looked at it is we thought, well, let's treat it like a missionary. If we would be called to the mission field, we'd sell everything and we'd go away for for 2 or 3 years. And if we weren't seeing results, we'd probably come back. And so that was the commitment we made in that difficult. We just took the next step. We said, let's start it, let's let it be known, and then, let's see what happens. And sure enough, as soon as I started it, I told a couple of friends, and about a day later, I got a phone call from a guy that said, Ken, I've never met you, but I hear you're working with Christian CEOs. And I said, yes, I am. I'm getting ready to get started to do that. And he said, well, I'm in. And I said, in what? And he said, I'm in whatever you're doing. And I said, well, you don't even know what I'm doing. And he said, well, you're working with Christian CEOs to help them build their business. Isn't that enough? Or, I figured you'll know what you're doing. And I said, well, I do know what I'm doing, but I figured you'd need to know more about it. He said, that's all I need to know. And I said, well, you don't even know how much it cost. And he said, it doesn't matter how much it costs. He said, I've been praying for somebody to come forward for the last 20 years to help me with my business who's a Christian. And I haven't found anybody. And when I heard about you yesterday, I knew that God had called you to be. And that's just the beauty. So those are difficult moments. It's not always that easy, of course, but it was an affirmation that, if you just take the next step, God has a way of providing exactly what you need.
No doubt about it. But one thing I wanted to highlight that you said there was how your wife was on board. Like she was like, let's go try this, let's do it. She was with you. It wasn't a thing that Ken was going off over here and charging forward with, right? And she's wondering what in the world's going on. I mean, even she was willing to take the missionary mindset. That's difficult, right? I mean, there's got to be such a unity there. But maybe I want to kind of tie in a couple of things here, but maybe there's, daily habits or practices or things that help you to stay rooted, right? Just in your faith as you're leading through things like that, but also incorporating the relationship, just the amazing relationship, right? That the Lord allows us to have with our spouse. How did you manage that? So she was like ready to move forward, even through some possible major difficulties.
Well, improve your team to improve your organization. I talk about, that's the first thing that Jesus did was he went out, and one of the most important people on your team is your spouse and your family. And God kind of revealed that to me. I've come out of a series of issues and mistakes in my past. So I'm very transparent about that. I didn't always have these principles and I didn't always live that way. But, the way I look at my wife, and I tell her that she's my number one customer because we'll be married for 50 years. And so, I want to treat her like I would treat my best customer. And that took me a long time to get there. So, like I said, sometimes I'm stubborn as well. But having her on board and being able to talk through what are you supportive of, and what's God telling you? Because if God can tell you, then and He can tell me, then He probably ought to tell us those things together. So, having that constant communication, I think spouses are partners to us in our life and in our business. And I've set some boundaries with her because I want to be able to honor her as my number one customer. And so one of those boundaries, as an example, is that if she ever calls or she ever needs me, that I'll answer the phone. She's the only one I'll do that for, but I want her to know that she has a direct line to me at any point, at any time, and she's the most important person that I'm going to talk to. And, because many years I put the business in front of her or put different things in front of her. And so just little decisions along those lines. One of the principles I also talk about is know your order, work your order. Jesus said, he made a statement, said, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. And what he did with that was he tells us that there's a first, seek first. So if there's a first, then there's a second, there's a third, there's a fourth, there's a fifth, and so on and so forth. God is a God of order. And the best businesses we know are built on processes. They have order. They have things that are repeatable. Franchises are able to sell franchises because they have the same process, whether you're in Des Moines, Iowa versus Los Angeles, California. And so, having those processes of our life are also important. I call myself a business Christian. I'm not necessarily a super Christian. I'm a business Christian. What that means is that my faith journey is still a work in progress. But I do believe in morning and evening routines. I believe I wrote an article for Entrepreneur magazine that said your first 30 minutes and your last 30 minutes is the most important hour of every day. And that first 30 minutes is a place for you to get your mind ready, get your energy level up. You know, you need to fill that first 30 minutes of your day with things that are going to go in that's going to create more energy for you. And for me, one of those things is reading the Bible or reading another book that gives me and another book that gives me my information or inspiration. It's setting down my priorities for the day. How do I want to show up? What's my most important meetings? You know, what do I need to accomplish today? If I don't accomplish anything else and everything else goes haywire, what's something I've got to accomplish before my head hits the pillow that night? So I want to hear the words, well done. And then the last 30 minutes of a day is a time before you go to rest. And so, you know, we need to have that routine, or I believe when we have those routines, we perform at a higher level, we get more done, and we can have a clearer perspective about what needs to get done.
Love it. I love the intentionality as well, and thinking through, hey, what gives me energy in the mornings? I am so much like that. I love routine, love being up early. We have a newborn right now, so it's not happening as often, unfortunately. But no doubt, that's my best time of day. That's where I'm most creative. That's I can just feel a different energy, and specifically, when I do some very specific things in the morning, it just changes my whole day. Is it no doubt about it? Even the focus on the evening. What about Ken? Speak to, or we're talking about it quickly. Maybe as you include the whole family in that, as you all had kids, and were there ways that they were part of your routines in any way where, I don't know, you're just obviously mentoring, discipling your children, as you're pushing forward in business, and they're seeing you and your wife together in this journey. How did you live that in front of them in a way that, hey, they want to also seek well done in everything they do?
Well, we want our kids, and I have great respect for team members, employees as well. I believe in the power of their own decision making and self will, those kinds of things. So I've never tried to convince or mandate to some degree my children's faith or my employees' faith or even the disciplines that they'll have in their life. I'll do what I learned from my father, which is I believe setting the example. So I do believe in bringing our kids into the business as much as possible. I want them to see our life. I want them to see the decisions that I'm making, Bibles that passages that I'm reading, books that I'm reading, all these different kinds of things are really critical. I schedule a meeting with my kids every year when they were younger at their school, and I called it my most important meeting of the year because I would go have a business meeting with my children during their lunch period, where they would go and have at the cafeteria, and I'd sit with them, get to know their friends, get to talk to their teacher, those kinds of things. I bring them to business meetings, so I host retreats for CEOs and business owners, and I believe in bringing our kids every year to one of those retreats where I can spend time with them. They can hear other business owners talk about the things that are going in their life and decisions that they're making and struggles that they're having. And so, we just try to live that. I give each of my kids a life verse, a Bible verse every year, or at the beginning of their life that is important. And then every year I remind them of the life verse that I believe that God's called them to. Those kinds of things just pour identity into your kids, but it helps them to see that it's real, it's authentic. Again, we're not perfect, but that we're living by the principles that we're trying to teach, and they can wrestle with it in real time. And so, my oldest is now 29, and my youngest is getting ready to be 14. They all have a very dynamic faith, and they're all independent. They all do their they've marched out different stories and journeys in their life, but I'm proud of each of them, and I have a great relationship with them. And so it's been fun to live life and do life with them. But they're an important part of my team, and so are my team members as well, my employees.
Speak to just a few final questions here, Ken. What are some of the most important metrics that you track? Could be personally or professionally, either one or both.
Sure. I tell every business owner there's 4 numbers that ought to make them important for their business and their life. There ought to be a financial number. There ought to be an employee number or team number. There ought to be a customer number. And then there ought to be what I call a kingdom impact number. And so each of those numbers are really critical to look at it. And so for us on that number, for the financial number, it's really around wealth creation. How are we developing it impacting future generations with the wealth that God's given to us, and finding new ways to create wealth and to grow wealth and to develop wealth. For my team number, it's at how many new partners are we adding every year? Because we're a growing organization. We're trying to spread all over the country and even all over the world. And so we're adding new partners to our organization where they're teaching biblical business principles in their community, working with CEOs and business owners and so on and so forth. The customer number relates to how many people are using the well done model and how are they making a difference for the kingdom through their business. And so we track that number, or I track that number. And then the kingdom impact for me number is really around this message that we're spreading. And so how many people are buying the book, reading the book, how many people are beginning to apply that kingdom impact and that well done perspective in their life. And we do through executive guides and resources that we provide. And so we track that number every year. Personally, I've got a couple other numbers that I track. One is how many books have I read each year, because I want to continue to grow. And obviously, the Bible is a book that I want to read every year as well. So we track some of those numbers that are really critical, because I believe that those numbers give clarity to the work that we're doing. And so again, it's not, sometimes I can still hear well done if I don't hit my metric. But the fact is that I'm working towards that metric, and I believe that's what God's most pleased with.
Ian, last question. How do you like to give back?
Oh, I love to give back. I do a lot of work with mentoring and kids and trying to develop speaking into their life. And, one of the principles, another principle is one of my favorites, is believe and ask in the impossible. And Jesus said, what's impossible with man is not impossible with God. And having that perspective. And so I love to go into kids' lives, or somebody that has had some difficulty in their life, and begin to help them to dream again and help them to see the impossible. I have a statement that says, and I believe it in my life as well, that people can do the impossible when somebody believes it's possible. And so one of the ways I love to give back is begin to see the impossible in other people, and then call out that in that person, because I want to be that person that they look back on and say, hey, I didn't believe I could, but Ken believed I could. And because he believed I could, all of a sudden I did something that I didn't think was possible to do.
Incredible. Ken, I'm grateful for your just desire to help other business leaders to be rooted in faith, ultimately, and throughout their entire business, and even breaking down these principles in a way that, if I had to just go find all those, it would kind of be overwhelming in itself, right? But I appreciate the book as well. So thank you so much, Ken. How can the listeners just learn more about you, your retreats, and find your book also?
Yeah, they can find out more at our website at www.ceoexperience.com, ceoexperience.com. They can look up the words well done with my name, and it'll pop up on Amazon, and it's sold in bookstores all over the country as well. So I do encourage them, if they can. If they send me a message, my contact information is on the CEO website. They can ask, and we can send them a signed copy as well of the book as well.
Awesome. That's a wrap. Ken, that's the end of the show.